Long before the pyramids, great civilizations rose and fell without leaving a single written word. This is the silent epic of prehistory, a puzzle that forces us to rethink everything we know about human achievement. Why does it matter? Because their stories are our prologue, packed with urgent lessons about resilience, innovation, and the fragile nature of any complex society. By the end of this journey, you will see the entire sweep of human history in a startling new light. We will venture into sunken landscapes swallowed by the sea and decipher the purpose of temples built by hunter-gatherers. We will uncover why these societies, some peaceful and prosperous, ultimately crumbled. What hidden force could make a thriving city simply empty itself? How does a civilization just vanish? What do you believe is the greatest threat to our own world today? That silent prologue of humanity is a world built not on words, but on stone and soil. Prehistory is the immense chapter before writing, a period that actually makes up over 99% of our entire story. This was not a simple, brutish waiting room for real civilization. It was a vibrant, innovative arena where societies achieved breathtaking complexity entirely without the written records we rely on today. So what exactly do we mean when we call these places civilizations? Scholars debate the term, but we can identify key ingredients. We look for substantial, permanent settlements that grew into true population centers. We find evidence of social stratification where people were not all equal, but had different roles and statuses. We see the drive to create monumental architecture, structures that dwarf individual homes and speak to a shared communal purpose. And we discover proof of specialized labor, where not everyone was a farmer, but some people became artisans, leaders, and engineers. A perfect and utterly baffling example is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. This is not a town or a city, but a breathtaking temple complex of carved stone pillars arranged in circles, built by hunter-gatherers a staggering 12,000 years ago. That is thousands of years before the first pyramid was even a thought in Egypt. How did people who had not yet mastered farming come together to erect such a monument? This single site shatters our traditional timeline of how societies develop. These pre-literate civilizations were achieving engineering and organizational marvels that rival the famous empires of Sumer and Egypt, yet they did it in silence. To understand them, we cannot read their chronicles. We must become detectives, sifting through the clues they left behind in buried bones, ancient pollen, and the very DNA of their descendants. How do you define a civilization when its voice has been utterly silenced? This is the foundational mystery that launches our investigation into humanity's first, and perhaps most revealing, experiments in building a world together. The story of these first civilizations is written not just in stone, but in ice and sea. To truly grasp their journey, we must first understand the dramatic world they inherited. Our planet was emerging from the last great ice age, entering a new geological chapter called the Holocene, which began roughly 11,700 years ago. For the first time in millennia, the climate settled into a period of remarkable stability. This was the golden opportunity humanity had been waiting for. The retreat of colossal ice sheets unveiled new continents of fertile soil. Warmer global temperatures encouraged the growth of wild grains and other plants. This was the essential foundation that made agriculture, and therefore permanent settlement, a viable dream. But this new world was not a gentle, predictable paradise. It was a stage of immense upheaval. As the world warmed, sea levels rose by over 120 meters, drowning vast coastal plains that had once been the heartlands of human habitation. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. Places like Doggerland, a fertile landmass that connected Britain to mainland Europe, were slowly swallowed by the North Sea. Similar fates likely befall other rich coastal regions around the globe, their stories lost to the rising waters. The climate itself was fickle, punctuated by sudden, brutal cold snaps like the Younger Dryas period, which briefly returned glacial conditions, and by stretches of intense drought. These shifts created a constant push and pull for our ancestors. A fertile valley that supported a growing village for generations could, within a few short years, turn to dust or be flooded by a changing river. This means the very first experiments in complex society, the very first gatherings of people who started building something greater than themselves, might now lie at the bottom of the sea, their monuments silent and undiscovered. The environment was the ultimate architect, presenting both the bounty for civilization to rise and the crises that would, time and again, test its resilience to the breaking point. So this windswept hill in Turkey presents us with our first great mystery. Göbekli Tepe is not a city or a fortress, but a cathedral from a world before cathedrals were even conceivable. Its stone circles, erected around 9,600 BCE, are made from colossal T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 16 tons. Each pillar is a gallery of ancient art, carved with foxes, scorpions, and vultures, creatures that held profound meaning for the people who labored here. And that is the central puzzle. The people who built this were, by our old definitions, simple hunter-gatherers. They had no farms to provide a steady surplus of food, no pottery to store supplies, and no metal tools to carve the hard limestone. Yet they achieved a feat of engineering and organization that would be impressive for any era. How did they do it, and more importantly, why? The traditional story of civilization tells us that agriculture came first. Farming created a food surplus which allowed for specialization, which in turn led to the creation of grand projects like temples. Göbekli Tepe turns that story completely on its head. What if the spiritual and social impulse came first? What if it was the desire to gather, to worship, and to build this sacred place that forced people to innovate? To feed the hundreds of workers required to quarry, carve, and erect these pillars, they may have needed to cultivate wild grasses on purpose, nudging nature toward domestication. The temple may have invented the farm, not the other way around. This single site rewrites the very motivation for civilization. Then, around 8000 BCE, an even more baffling event occurred. The people of Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried their entire monumental complex. They did not destroy it in anger or abandon it in haste. They carefully filled the circles with earth and stone, preserving them perfectly for millennia, as if putting a sacred memory to bed. Why would a society invest such staggering effort into a place, only to seal it forever? Was it a profound religious act? Did their world change so dramatically that the old symbols lost their power? The hill offers no written answers, only a silent, monumental question. Göbekli Tepe stands as a testament to a forgotten truth, that the human drive to create meaning, to build something larger than ourselves, may be the most powerful and ancient force of all. While the builders of Göbekli Tepe were shaping stone pillars on their hill, an entire world was vanishing beneath the waves far to the west. Today, the North Sea is a cold expanse of grey water, but for millennia it was a vast, sunken continent known as Doggerland. This was not a narrow land bridge, but a sprawling, low-lying landscape of rolling hills, winding rivers, lush marshes, and dense forests. Herds of mammoth and reindeer grazed its plains, while its rivers teemed with fish, supporting vibrant communities of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. This was a heartland, a place of abundance and likely profound cultural significance. Then the world changed. As the great ice sheets melted, sea levels crept steadily higher, slowly claiming the land inch by inch. But the end did not come slowly. Around 6200 BCE, a catastrophic event sealed its fate. Off the coast of Norway, a massive section of the continental shelf, known as the Storegga Slide, collapsed into the deep ocean. This underwater avalanche triggered a tsunami of unimaginable scale, a wall of water that would have raced across the sea and slammed into the remaining coasts of Doggerland. In a matter of hours, this single event would have inundated the final refuges, turning a vibrant homeland into a seabed. What was lost in that deluge? We can only speculate. Perhaps there were seasonal gathering sites that were the precursors to permanent villages. Maybe there were sacred places, carved totems, or oral traditions that told the history of this people, all erased by the salt water. The occasional trawler net that hauls up an ancient antler tool or a mammoth bone from the seafloor is a ghostly message from this drowned world. Doggerland represents a civilization lost not to internal conflict or poor management, but to the sheer, unstoppable force of a changing planet. Its story is a haunting echo, a reminder that the very ground beneath our feet is not as permanent as it seems. Far out in the blue Mediterranean, the islands of Malta and Gozo hold another piece of the prehistoric puzzle. Here, a culture flourished in isolation, achieving something that seems to defy its time and resources. Between 3600 and 2500 BCE, these islanders built the world's oldest free-standing stone structures, monuments that predate Stonehenge by over 1,000 years and the Great Pyramid of Giza by centuries. We know them as the megalithic temples of Malta. To stand before Gewith above Gantaja, which means the giant's tower, is to feel a profound sense of awe. Its name comes from a local legend that a giantess built it while carrying her child, and looking at the massive limestone blocks, some weighing many tons, you can understand why the myth emerged. These stones were quarried, transported, and raised by a society that, like the builders of Göbekli Tepe, had no metal tools, no wheels, and no draft animals. The precision is what truly astounds. The stones are not simply stacked, they are meticulously fitted together, forming graceful curves and spacious chambers that have survived for millennia. These were not simple gathering places. They were elaborate temple complexes, complete with altars for offerings, mysterious oracle holes through which voices might have echoed from hidden priests, and walls adorned with intricate spiral carvings whose meaning is forever lost to us. This was the heart of a complex and deeply spiritual society. The same culture created distinctive, corpulent statuettes, often called the Fat Ladies. These figures, with their full forms and often featureless heads, are found in the temples. Do they represent a mother goddess, a symbol of fertility and abundance for the community, or are they venerated ancestors watching over the living? Their silent, rounded forms are a powerful reminder that this civilization had its own rich symbolic world, a complete cosmology built without any outside influence. Then, around 2500 BCE, something went terribly wrong. This vibrant, innovative, and seemingly prosperous culture simply vanished. The temples were abandoned, falling into a silence that has lasted for over 4,000 years. The islands appear to have been largely depopulated. What could have caused such a complete collapse? The stones offer no clear enemy, no tale of invasion. Instead, archaeologists look to quieter, more insidious threats. Could generations of intensive farming on these small islands have exhausted the soil, turning fertility to dust? Did a shift in climate bring a lasting drought, choking off their water supply and their food? Was it a perfect storm of environmental degradation and resource depletion, slowly starving a society that had invested everything in its spiritual life, perhaps at the expense of its practical survival? The temples stand as a majestic, haunting monument not just to human achievement, but to human fragility. A civilization that could move mountains of stone could not, in the end, save itself from silence. While the temples of Malta were being abandoned, a city of pyramids was rising on the other side of the world. In the arid Soup Valley of Peru, the sacred city of Caral represents a civilization that defies our deepest assumptions. Flourishing around the same time as the Great Pyramids of Egypt, Caral is the oldest known center of civilization in the entire Americas. This was not a simple village, but a sprawling, planned urban complex featuring 6 large pyramidal structures, sunken circular plazas, extensive residential quarters, and even a grand amphitheater. Every aspect of its design speaks to a highly organized theocratic society, one where religion and civic life were seamlessly intertwined. But the most astonishing feature of Caral is not what it has, but what it lacks. After decades of excavation, archaeologists have found no trace of warfare. There are no defensive walls, no stockpiles of weapons, and no skeletal remains showing signs of violent trauma. In a world we often imagine as brutal and chaotic, Caral stands as a monumental testament to peace. How did they achieve such complexity without the apparent engine of conflict? The answer seems to lie in cooperation and commerce. Caral was the heart of a vast trade network. Its people cultivated cotton and developed sophisticated irrigation for their crops, but they also traded their valuable cotton textiles and other goods for vital resources. Evidence shows they had maritime connections stretching along the Pacific coast, exchanging goods with distant communities for fish, shellfish, and other necessities. This was a society built not on conquest, but on a shared economic and spiritual vision. They even possessed a sophisticated understanding of astronomy, aligning their structures with celestial bodies to track the seasons, a knowledge essential for both their agriculture and their rituals. So how does a society this successful and seemingly harmonious simply disappear? The collapse of the Caral Soup civilization around 2000 BCE appears to be a story of environmental vulnerability, not internal revolt or invasion. The region was likely struck by prolonged, severe droughts, possibly linked to shifts in ocean and atmospheric patterns. These droughts would have crippled their agricultural base, dried up their irrigation systems, and ultimately shattered the trade networks that held their cooperative world together. When the water failed, the foundation of their peaceful society crumbled. Caral presents a profound and haunting alternative. It challenges the long-held belief that war and social inequality are inevitable prerequisites for civilization. Here was a society that for 600 years thrived on collective purpose and shared knowledge. Its silent pyramids ask us a difficult question. Could it be that cooperation is a more powerful, yet more fragile force than conflict? The silent, orderly streets of Mohenjo-Daro tell a story of unparalleled success, yet their very peacefulness deepens the mystery of their end. The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan, was a colossus of the ancient world. At its peak, it sprawled across a region larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, a vast network of cities and towns connected by a shared vision of order. Walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa would have felt strangely modern. The cities were laid out in a precise grid pattern, with main avenues dividing residential blocks. Their most brilliant achievement was an obsession with water, a sophisticated system of public wells, bathrooms with drainage, and covered sewers that ran beneath the streets, a level of urban sanitation that would not be seen again for thousands of years. This was a society of remarkable standardization. using uniform weights and measures across its entire territory to facilitate trade that stretched from the mountains of Afghanistan to the shores of Mesopotamia. They even developed a unique script found carved on small seals, but despite countless attempts, no one has ever managed to read it. Their voice remains locked away. Then, around 1900 BCE, this immense and brilliantly organized civilization began to crumble, but the ruins show no signs of a dramatic, fiery invasion. There are no layers of ash from a great conflagration, no mass graves filled with the victims of war. This collapse was not a bang, but a whisper. So what could possibly cause such a robust society to simply fade away? The leading suspect is a slow-motion environmental disaster. Scientists studying ancient climate patterns have found evidence that the monsoon rains, the lifeblood of their agriculture, began to fail. For centuries, the rains had been reliable, feeding the Indus River and its tributaries, but a prolonged and severe drought would have starved the farmlands that fed the cities. To make matters worse, the great rivers themselves may have begun to shift their courses. The Indus is a powerful, meandering river, and a major change in its path could have left entire cities stranded, turning bustling ports into dusty backwaters. Imagine the slow, grinding despair as the water levels in the public wells dropped year after year as the fields produced less and less food. Trade routes would have withered as the economic heart of the civilization faltered. The response was not a unified fight for survival, but a quiet, pragmatic exodus. People did not die in the streets, they simply packed their belongings and left. They migrated east and south, settling in smaller villages and returning to a simpler, rural way of life. The grand urban experiment, with its standardized bricks and complex drains, was no longer sustainable. The civilization did not die, it dissolved. Its people scattered, their knowledge and traditions slowly blending into new cultures. The silent script on their seals is a perfect metaphor for their end. A profound and orderly society that chose to walk away from its magnificent cities, leaving behind the ultimate question of what we are truly willing to do when the water runs out. The fertile river valleys that nurtured Caral and the Indus were not accidents of geography. They were the product of a profound human transformation, a revolution so slow its participants would never have known its name. We call it the Neolithic Revolution, the moment we stopped taking what the land offered and started demanding it provide. This was the deliberate domestication of the world, a process that unfolded over millennia as wild grasses like wheat and barley in the Middle East, rice in East Asia, and maize in the Americas were coaxed into becoming reliable crops. At the same time, animals like goats, sheep, and cattle were brought into the human circle, providing not just meat but milk, wool, and muscle power. This shift from foraging to farming is often presented as the brilliant spark that lit the fire of civilization, and for good reason. For the first time, a consistent food surplus was possible. This surplus changed everything. It meant that not everyone had to spend their days hunting or gathering. Some people could now specialize, becoming potters, weavers, soldiers, priests, or administrators. It allowed for larger, sedentary populations to gather in permanent villages that would eventually swell into cities. Wealth could be accumulated and stored, and with it, social hierarchies began to harden. But this revolution was a double-edged sword. The very act of farming tethered a society to a single piece of land, creating a new and profound vulnerability. A hunter-gatherer band facing a drought could simply move on. A farming community of thousands was anchored in place, utterly dependent on the success of its harvest. They became hostages to the weather, to pests, and to the slow, silent tragedy of soil depletion. The land that gave them life could just as easily turn against them. This new way of life demanded new rules: who owned the best fields near the river, how was water for irrigation shared, who controlled the granaries that held the community's survival. Agriculture necessitated complex social organization, leading to the invention of land ownership, inheritance laws, and centralized authority to manage these critical resources. The stability that farming provided was a powerful kind of prison. It built societies that were magnificent, ordered, and productive, but also rigid and brittle. The rise of civilization was at its core a monumental gamble. It was a bet that the sun would shine, the rains would fall, and the soil would remain fertile, season after season, generation after generation. For the people of Malta, for the Harappans, for so many others, that was a bet they ultimately lost. The foundation of their world became the source of its collapse. This transformation from equality to hierarchy is one of humanity's most profound shifts. In the small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers, survival was a collective effort. Leadership was often fluid, based on skill and experience for a specific task, not a permanent title. But when people settled down, everything changed. The very act of storing a grain surplus created a new kind of power. Someone had to manage it, to decide how much to save for the lean months and how much to distribute. This was the first crack in the egalitarian foundation. Specialized roles began to crystallize. A person with a deep understanding of the spirit world, a shaman, could negotiate with forces that controlled the rain and the sun. A particularly skilled artisan who could make the finest stone tools or the strongest pottery gained a new kind of social value. Their knowledge made them indispensable, granting them a level of influence that went beyond the daily hunt. As villages swelled into towns, the scale of problems demanded a new kind of organization. How do you mobilize hundreds of people to dig an irrigation canal that will benefit the entire community? Who coordinates the harvest when the grain is ripe across vast fields? Who leads the defense if a neighboring group eyes your stored wealth? These practical challenges created a need for coordinators, for managers and leaders. In the beginning, this authority might have been earned, a meritocracy where the most capable person, the wisest elder, or the most charismatic speaker stepped forward. Think of the anonymous mastermind who first envisioned the layout of Mohenjo-Daro's drains, a person whose organizational genius was so clear they were simply given the authority to see it through. But this system had a flaw. Over generations, that temporary, earned authority had a tendency to harden into permanent, inherited power. A chieftain's son, raised in a household of privilege and influence, would naturally be seen as the next leader. What began as a practical solution to manage complexity slowly solidified into a social class. We can see this etched into the very bones of the past. In one grave, a single individual is buried with exquisite jade ornaments, polished obsidian mirrors, and sacrifices of retainers, clearly sent into the afterlife with every marker of supreme status. In another, just a few feet away, a skeleton lies with nothing but a simple clay pot. The grand tombs for the few and the simple graves for the many tell a story of a society that had firmly divided itself. This new inequality needed a justification, and it found a powerful one in religion. Rulers and priests began to claim a special, exclusive connection to the gods. In the temple cities of Malta, the elite who presided over the sacred rituals held the keys to cosmic order. In peaceful Caral, the rulers were likely seen as divine intermediaries, their authority flowing from their ability to ensure the sun rose and the rivers flowed. This divine sanction made social stratification seem not just practical, but part of the natural order of the universe. The emergence of social hierarchy was the engine that enabled humanity to build its first pyramids and cities, a revolutionary tool for large-scale cooperation. Yet from its very inception, it carried a deep tension, sowing the seeds of inequality and potential unrest that every complex society, even our own, has been forced to navigate ever since. The true genius of these early societies is etched not in grand declarations, but in the quiet hum of daily innovation. We often picture prehistoric technology as little more than crude stone axes, yet these cultures were masters of material science, solving complex problems with the world they had at hand. The invention of pottery was a quiet revolution. A simple fired clay vessel did more than just hold water. It allowed for the safe storage of grain surpluses, the cooking of nutritious stews, and the transport of goods. It fundamentally changed the relationship between people and their food, creating a buffer against scarcity. On the looms, the transformation of plant fibers and animal wool into textiles provided protection from the elements and a new medium for artistic expression. And with the invention of the sail, the world suddenly grew smaller, enabling the long-distance trade that connected cultures like Caral to the bounty of the sea. The ambition of their engineering still takes our breath away. Raising a 16-ton pillar at Göbekli Tepe or fitting the colossal stones of Malta's Gewith above Gantaja required more than brute force. It demanded a sophisticated, unwritten knowledge of physics and mathematics. The builders understood leverage, counterweights, and the geometry of stable structures. Their celestial alignments reveal an even deeper insight, a patient, generations-long observation of the sun, moon, and stars. They learned to read the sky as a calendar, knowing precisely where the sun would rise on the solstice, allowing them to anchor their rituals and their agricultural cycles to the cosmic clock. This was a profound form of timekeeping, a technology of the mind that gave order to their universe. This spirit of innovation reached a stunning peak in the Indus Valley. Their use of standardized, fired bricks of uniform ratio across an entire civilization is a testament to a culture that valued order and efficiency on a massive scale. But their true masterpiece lay beneath the streets. The intricate network of covered drains, cesspits, and freshwater wells in Mohenjo-Daro represents a public health revolution. They engineered a system to manage water and waste with a foresight that would not be matched for thousands of years, protecting their dense urban population from disease in a way many modern cities still struggle to achieve. Across the ocean, in the Americas, early farmers performed a different kind of miracle. They took a wild grass called teosinte with tiny, nearly inedible kernels, and through centuries of selective cultivation, transformed it into maize, the staple crop that would fuel empires. This was genetic engineering at its most patient, a partnership with nature that reshaped the continent. Yet every one of these brilliant innovations came with a hidden cost, a vulnerability woven into the fabric of progress. The very irrigation canals that turned deserts into gardens could, during a prolonged drought, become dusty graves for a civilization's hopes. A society that relied on standardized trade networks would starve if those routes faltered. The specialized knowledge of the priest astronomer or the master brickmaker, so crucial for maintaining the system, could be lost in a single generation of chaos. Technology built the ladder that allowed civilizations to climb to unprecedented heights, but it was a ladder that could not easily be abandoned. Each step upward increased the distance of the eventual fall, creating a world of magnificent, interconnected systems whose failure could trigger a silent, systemic collapse. These ancient networks of trade were the silent, invisible web that connected humanity's first great experiments. A piece of obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for its razor-sharp edge, tells a story that words cannot. A single lump of it, chemically traced to a specific volcano in Turkey, could end up in a village hundreds of miles away, passed from hand to hand across cultures and languages. A Mediterranean seashell carved into a bead would find its final resting place in a grave in Central Europe, a gleaming, exotic treasure from a world its owner never saw. These were not just transactions, they were conversations. The flow of goods carried with it a flow of ideas, a new way to shape a pot, a more efficient design for a fishhook, or a powerful symbol of a mother goddess could travel along these routes, cross-pollinating cultures separated by vast distances. The very architectural style of Caral, with its sunken circular plazas and pyramidal mounds, appears in other sites across the Andes, suggesting a shared cosmological vision that spread through this ancient interaction. This was the internet of the prehistoric world, a slow but relentless exchange of innovation and belief. A farming technique that allowed one community to thrive could, within a few generations, boost the population of another region entirely. This interconnectivity provided a crucial layer of resilience. A society facing a local drought might not starve if it could trade its finely woven textiles or its surplus pottery for grain from a more fortunate neighbor. Their fates were intertwined, creating a safety net of mutual dependence. Yet this brilliant web had a terrifying weakness. The very connections that provided strength also created systemic risk. Imagine a civilization like the Indus, a central hub in a vast economic network. Its sudden decline would not have been an isolated event. For every partner that relied on its standardized weights, its cotton cloth, or its seal-stamped guarantees of quality, its collapse would have been an economic earthquake. A key trade route disrupted by a shifting river or social unrest could sever the flow of vital resources like tin for bronze or high-quality timber. The failure of one major node could trigger a cascade of failure in others, a prehistoric version of a supply chain collapse that pulled multiple interconnected societies down into a collective dark age. The bonds of trade that lifted civilizations up now ensured that when one fell, it would not fall alone. Shared belief was the invisible architecture that held these first cities together. Before written laws or standing armies, what stopped a society from simply fracturing? The answer often lay in a common faith, a powerful ideology that acted as social glue. This shared world, you gave everyone a place in the cosmic order, from the farmer tilling the soil to the priest interpreting the stars. It justified the emerging social hierarchy, presenting it not as a human invention but as a divine plan. The sheer scale of Göbekli Tepe or the Maltese temples is the ultimate proof of this power. Moving 16-ton stones without wheels or animals required the coordinated labor of thousands, all united by a common purpose that transcended individual need. This was not forced labor, but a collective act of devotion. These sites were far more than just temples. They were the original community centers, the places where knowledge was preserved, where the calendar was tracked by the movement of shadows across sacred stones, and where the very identity of the people was forged and reinforced with every gathering. The ruler's authority flowed directly from this spiritual source. By claiming a divine mandate, the elite class cemented their power. They were the essential intermediaries between the people and the gods, the ones who ensured the rains would come and the sun would rise. This ideological cohesion was a civilization's greatest strength, enabling breathtaking collective action, but it built a house on a fragile foundation. What happened when the gods seemed to turn away? A prolonged drought that killed the crops or a famine that gripped the city was not just an environmental crisis. It was a theological catastrophe. If the priests could no longer deliver the favor of the gods, their legitimacy shattered. The entire social contract, built on the promise of divine protection, could collapse into doubt and anger. The population might conclude that their leaders had lost the gods' favor, or that the old rituals were no longer effective. This spiritual vacuum could be as devastating as any invasion or drought. When a people lose their shared story, the reason for their sacrifice and obedience vanishes. The stones of their temples still stand, but the faith that moved them is gone, leaving a society with nothing to hold it together from the inside. Their grandest monuments could not protect them from the quiet, creeping threat of a changing landscape. Every one of these early civilizations engaged in a constant, high-stakes negotiation with the world around them. Their survival depended on a handful of local treasures, fresh water, fertile soil, sturdy timber, and wild game. Managing these resources was not a matter of policy, but of existential necessity. Look at the genius of the Indus Valley people, constructing massive, centralized granaries to buffer against lean years and engineering city-wide drains to protect their population from waterborne disease. Or consider the Caral soup culture, coaxing a civilization from a desert valley by diverting rivers into intricate irrigation canals, turning barren ground into fields of cotton and food. These were triumphs of human foresight and cooperation, yet in a cruel paradox, their very successes often contained the seeds of their own undoing. The same intensive farming that fed a city like Mohenjo-Daro could, over generations, poison the land. When fields are continually irrigated in hot, dry climates, water evaporates and leaves behind mineral salts. Slowly, inexorably, the soil becomes saline and crops simply fail to grow. This process of salinization is believed to have crippled the farmlands of ancient Mesopotamia, and it may have been a silent killer elsewhere. On the small islands of Malta, the very act of sustaining a temple-building society likely put immense strain on a limited environment. Generations of clearing forests for timber, for fuel, and to create new farmland would have stripped the thin soil of its anchor. When the rains came, they would have washed the precious topsoil directly into the sea. Deforestation does more than just cause erosion. It can actually change the local microclimate, making an area drier and less hospitable to the very plants people need to survive. These societies were often operating on the edge, in fragile, marginal environments where the balance between prosperity and collapse was terrifyingly thin. A civilization could thrive for centuries, mastering its world, only to be pushed past its tipping point by a single, sustained shift. A run of poor harvests, a slight but permanent change in monsoon patterns, or the slow silting up of a vital river channel could unravel everything. The collapse of these early cultures was rarely a simple story of invasion or revolt. At its core, it was frequently an ecological failure. Their stories stand as stark, sobering reminders that no society, no matter how brilliant its innovations or how powerful its gods, is immune to the fundamental constraints of the natural world. The silent ruins of these ancient cities share a common, ghostly signature. Their end often coincides not with a war, but with a change in the weather. While local mismanagement of soil or forests weakened them from within, it was often a large-scale planetary climate shift that delivered the final, decisive blow. We can now read the diary of Earth's ancient climate, a record locked away in the most unlikely places. Scientists called paleoclimatologists drill deep into ice sheets, extracting cores that contain tiny bubbles of the planet's ancient atmosphere. They examine the layers of sediment at the bottom of lakes and oceans, and they study the growth rings of ancient trees. This natural archive reveals a history of dramatic instability. One of the most devastating events is known as the 4.2 kiloyear event. Around 2200 BCE, a period of intense global aridification began, a mega-drought that stretched on for centuries. Its fingerprint is found everywhere. It is implicated in the sudden collapse of the mighty Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, a society that literally prayed for rain in its cuneiform tablets. It likely contributed to the fall of Egypt's old kingdom, the pyramid builders, whose lifeline, the Nile, saw its annual floods fail. And this same global drought coincides precisely with the dissolution of the Indus Valley cities and the abandonment of Caral in Peru. These were not isolated local disasters but synchronized failures across the globe. An earlier event, the 8.2 kilo-year event, was a sudden, brutal cold snap that may have disrupted the very first farming communities in the Middle East just as they were finding their footing. These were not the gentle, gradual changes a society could adapt to over generations. They were sharp, catastrophic shifts, like a thermostat being violently turned. A civilization is a delicate instrument, finely tuned to a specific climatic regime, to a reliable monsoon or a predictable river flood. When that rhythm was shattered, the entire composition fell apart. Crops that had fed millions for generations simply withered in the fields. The familiar water sources, the great rivers and springs that defined their world, shriveled to trickles. Famine was the immediate, brutal result. This was the great leveler, a force that did not care about a society's monuments, its art, or its complex social structure. Human ingenuity, for all its brilliance in building pyramids and designing sewers, could be utterly overwhelmed by these planetary forces. The stories of the Akkadians, the Harappans, and the people of Caral are not just ancient history. They are sobering, full-scale case studies. They demonstrate with chilling clarity what happens when a civilization, no matter how advanced, is pushed past its environmental limits by a climate it can no longer predict or control. So the greatest threat to a civilization may not be an external enemy, but its own internal complexity. This idea moves us beyond blaming a single drought or invasion toward a more unsettling model known as systemic collapse. Imagine a civilization not as a solid fortress, but as a vast, intricate machine with countless moving parts. Each part is a specialized subsystem, perfectly tuned for a specific job. You have the agricultural sector feeding the cities, the religious institutions justifying the social order, the trade networks moving goods across continents, and the administrative class coordinating it all. This intricate web of interdependence is the source of its incredible power and efficiency. It allows for the creation of monumental architecture, vast surpluses of wealth, and a rich cultural life. But this very connectivity creates a profound fragility. In a simpler, village-based society, if one community's crops failed, others nearby might still thrive, and people could disperse or rely on kinship networks. In a hyper-complex civilization, every part is locked into the whole. The system has no slack, no backup plan. It's a brilliant but brittle house of cards. Now pull just one card. A prolonged drought causes the wheat harvest to fail across the heartland. This is not just a bad season, it is a shock wave. The famine that follows means the urban laborers who build monuments and maintain the drains are too weak to work. The state cannot collect grain taxes, so it cannot pay its soldiers and administrators. Trade routes wither as there is nothing to exchange, bankrupting the merchants and the artisans who depend on imported materials. As hunger spreads, the people lose faith in the priest-king who can no longer intercede with the gods for rain. Social unrest brews, and the central authority, starved of resources and legitimacy, simply dissolves. The civilization does not get conquered, it unravels from the inside. This model explains the haunting pattern we see at places like the Indus Valley or the end of the Bronze Age, where magnificent cities were abandoned not in a fiery cataclysm, but in a slow, quiet exodus. Their very peak of achievement, their dazzling complexity, had made them exquisitely vulnerable to a cascade of failure. They had sacrificed resilience for efficiency, and when the first domino fell, there was nothing left to stop the rest from tumbling down. The rooftops of Çatalhöyük were its streets, a sprawling labyrinth of human connection high above the silent ground. For nearly 2,000 years, this settlement in Turkey thrived as one of humanity's first and most unique experiments in urban living. Up to 10,000 people called it home, residing in a honeycomb of mud brick houses so densely packed that you could walk across the entire town without ever setting foot on the earth. Life unfolded through rooftop hatchways, with families descending ladders into their single-room homes, their floors often serving as the final resting place for their own ancestors buried beneath the plaster. This was a society of profound artistic expression, creating vibrant murals of hunting scenes and enigmatic, corpulent figurines that speak to a rich spiritual world. Yet, after centuries of stability, the people of Çatalhöyük made a quiet, collective decision. They began to leave, and the town was gradually abandoned. This was not a collapse in the traditional sense, but a slow, deliberate dispersal. So why would a community walk away from a home built over dozens of generations? The answer lies in the slow erosion of its foundation. Centuries of intensive farming, along with the constant need for timber and fuel for plaster, had stripped the surrounding landscape. The very land that had once been a lush paradise of oak and juniper forests was now degraded, its soil depleted and its game animals scarce. Overgrazing by their own herds of sheep and goats would have turned pastures to dust, creating a feedback loop of environmental decline. At the same time, the social fabric may have frayed under the strain of such dense proximity. Living literally wall to wall with thousands of others, with no public spaces or streets, must have generated immense social friction. How did they resolve disputes without a clear central authority? Did the intricate rituals that once bound them together lose their power to maintain order? As conditions grew more difficult, a new and tempting alternative emerged on the horizon. A more mobile, pastoralist way of life was becoming viable, offering freedom from the grind of intensive agriculture and the confines of a crowded town. The abandonment of Çatalhöyük was likely not a failure, but a rational adaptation. Its people voted with their feet, choosing a different future over the slow decline of their magnificent, but ultimately unsustainable experiment. Their story is a powerful reminder that sometimes walking away from a complex system is the most sophisticated survival strategy of all. The bustling streets of an early city, for all their innovation, created a perfect storm for disease. For the first time in history, thousands of people lived in close, permanent quarters, often alongside their domesticated animals. This new proximity was a gateway. Pathogens that had once circulated harmlessly in livestock, diseases like smallpox or influenza, could now leap the species barrier into human populations. In a small, mobile band, a sick person might recover or pass away without affecting the whole group. But in a dense urban center, a single new virus could race through the crowded lanes, igniting an epidemic that would burn through the population with terrifying speed. While we rarely find direct evidence of these outbreaks in ancient bones, the demographic shadows they cast are long and dark. At the same time, the very engine of a civilization's growth, its rising population, could become its greatest liability. Every environment has a carrying capacity, a finite number of people it can support with its available water, farmland, and resources. A society could flourish for generations, its numbers swelling, pushing right up against that invisible ceiling. It was a precarious balance. Then, a single climate shock, a drought that lasted just a few years too long, would push the entire system over the edge. The result was not a gradual decline, but a heart-breakingly swift collapse. The population, with its safety net gone, could crash, but the opposite problem could be just as deadly. What if the birth rate began to fall, or the skilled artisans and knowledgeable farmers, seeing a dim future, simply chose to leave? This slow bleed of talent and numbers, this quiet sapping of a society's vitality, would have been just as fatal as any plague. A city needs a critical mass of people to maintain its complex infrastructure, to man its irrigation canals, to repair its monumental walls. Without that essential human energy, the system slowly grinds to a halt. The grandest temples and palaces stand empty not because they were destroyed, but because there was no one left with the will or the knowledge to care for them. The fate of these first civilizations was thus written in a language we are only now learning to read, a story told not in grand conquests, but in the silent, invisible arithmetic of microbes and human choices. The silent stories of these lost worlds are not simply guessed at, they are meticulously decoded. How can we possibly know the intimate details of a society that vanished millennia ago, from its daily meals to its spiritual beliefs? The answer lies in a quiet scientific revolution, a detective's toolkit that allows us to read the earth itself. The most fundamental principle is stratigraphy, the simple but powerful idea that in an archaeological site, the deeper you dig, the further back in time you go. Each layer of soil and debris represents a chapter in a site's history, a buried timeline where a stone tool found beneath a pottery shard is unquestionably older. But to move from a relative sequence to actual calendar dates, we turn to radiocarbon dating. All living things absorb a radioactive isotope called carbon-14. When they die, that isotope begins to decay at a steady, predictable rate. By measuring how much carbon-14 remains in a charred seed, a piece of wooden timber, or a fragment of bone, scientists can calculate its age, sometimes pinpointing when a temple was built or a fire was lit to within a few decades. This transforms a mysterious ruin from a timeless relic into a moment in history. Yet dates and layers only tell part of the story. To understand how people lived, we need to know what they ate and what their world looked like. This is where archaeobotanists and zooarchaeologists work their magic. By sifting through ancient trash pits and hearths with fine mesh screens, they recover tiny, precious clues, a handful of burnt barley grains, the fragile shell of a snail, the minuscule bone of a fish. A pile of sheep bones butchered in a specific way reveals a community of herders. A sudden shift in pollen types preserved in lake mud shows the moment a forest was cleared for farmland. These are the fragments of a vanished menu and a lost landscape. Modern technology has gifted archaeologists with superhero vision. In dense jungles where the ground is invisible, LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, uses lasers shot from an aircraft to map the terrain beneath the canopy, revealing the ghostly footprints of entire cities with plazas, canals, and roads hidden for centuries. Meanwhile, ground-penetrating radar sends pulses into the earth to create an ultrasound image of what lies below, mapping buried walls or tombs without ever lifting a trowel. Perhaps the most profound breakthrough comes from genetics. By extracting ancient DNA from human skeletal remains, we can now trace epic migrations and family relationships across thousands of years. The DNA of a single wheat seed can tell the story of how a wild grass was transformed into a global staple. Every artifact, from a grand statue to a common pot, is a single piece in an immense cross-temporal jigsaw puzzle. This is not treasure hunting, it is a rigorous act of resurrection, a science that gives voice to the silence and allows us to hear the faint, persistent echoes of our deepest past. The ruins of these lost worlds did not vanish without an echo. Their collapse was so profound, so deeply traumatic, that it became etched into the very soul of human storytelling, evolving over generations into the myths and legends we still tell today. Perhaps the most universal of these stories is the tale of a great world-ending flood. It appears in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, where the god E warns the hero Utnapishtim to build a boat to survive the deluge. It is central to the biblical account of Noah, who saves the animals from the rising waters. These stories, found in cultures from every corner of the globe, may be a shared, haunting folk memory of the post-glacial sea level rise that drowned entire continents like Doggerland, a cataclysm so vast it scarred the collective consciousness of humanity. Then there is the enduring mystery of Atlantis, described by Plato as an advanced and powerful civilization that sank beneath the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. While likely a philosophical allegory, its core may be a distorted echo of a real historical disaster. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, now known as Santorini, exploded in one of the largest eruptions in human history. The cataclysm would have generated tsunamis that smashed into the brilliant Minoan Civilization on Crete, devastating their coastal centers and likely triggering their eventual decline. For generations afterward, the story of a sophisticated island kingdom destroyed by the sea would have been told and retold, its details blurring until it became the legendary Atlantis. These myths frequently speak of a lost golden age, a time of perfect harmony, abundance, and peace that existed before a great fall. This idealized past is rarely a precise historical record. Instead, it is a profound psychological artifact. In the aftermath of collapse, faced with the rubble of their cities and the silence of their temples, survivors grappled with a terrifying question. How could something so great, so ordered, simply end? The story of a golden age provides a comforting answer. It frames the disaster not as a random, meaningless event, but as a moral lesson. The collapse becomes a punishment for human folly, for arrogance, or for turning away from the gods. It is a way to find meaning in the rubble, to transform collective trauma into a cautionary tale for future generations. These ancient stories are the long shadow cast by prehistoric failures. They remind us that the end of a world is never just a physical event of falling stones and failing crops. It is a cultural and psychological cataclysm that resonates for thousands of years, a ghost in our collective memory that whispers a simple, urgent warning from across the millennia. A civilization's collapse was not always the final word. While the grand cities of the Indus Valley or the temple builders of Malta faded into silence, other societies found ways to bend without breaking. What separated those who vanished from those who endured? The answer lies not in the scale of their monuments, but in the flexibility of their foundations. Societies that survived were masters of adaptation, built on a principle of diversity rather than a single, brittle pillar of success. A community that relied solely on intensive wheat farming, for instance, would starve during a prolonged drought. But a society that also kept herds of goats, gathered wild plants, and traded for fish had a portfolio of survival options. When one source failed, they could pivot to another. This economic diversity was often mirrored by a more flexible social structure. Highly rigid top-down hierarchies with a god-king at the apex could shatter completely when that leader lost legitimacy during a crisis. In contrast, a society with distributed power, perhaps among village elders or clan leaders, could make quicker, more localized decisions to adapt to changing conditions. They were not waiting for an order from a distant, crumbling capital. We see this strategic adaptation in the fate of the Indus Valley people. Their story may not have ended in a mass die-off, but in a deliberate, pragmatic choice. Faced with failing monsoons and shifting rivers, they did not fight a futile war against the changing climate. Instead, they made a calculated retreat. They walked away from their magnificent, complex cities and dispersed into smaller, more manageable villages. They returned to a simpler, more rural way of life that was sustainable within the new environmental reality. This was not a failure of their civilization, but a brilliant success of their survival instinct. Geography also played a decisive role. A culture nestled in a single, vulnerable river valley had all its eggs in one basket. But a society occupying a varied landscape with access to highlands, river plains, and coastlines could shift its population and its economic focus as conditions demanded. The most resilient cultures also maintained strong, flexible social networks, bonds of kinship and reciprocity that extended beyond their immediate village. In a time of local famine, these networks allowed people to call upon relatives in a more fortunate region for help, creating an informal safety net that no centralized granary could ever match. The enduring lesson from the deep past is clear. The societies that lasted were rarely the most powerful or complex. They were the most agile, the most resourceful, and the most willing to change their entire way of life when the world demanded it. In the long run, resilience has always proven to be a far greater strength than sheer monumental power. A civilization's collapse does not erase its people from the earth. When the great cities fell silent, the survivors did not vanish. They walked away carrying their most vital possessions not in their hands but in their minds. The true legacy of these early worlds was not the stone they left behind, but the knowledge they took with them. While political structures and urban centers crumbled, the hard-won innovations of centuries could not be so easily undone. The domestication of a single strain of wheat, the breeding of a more resilient goat, the very idea of planting a seed and waiting for a harvest, these were irreversible revolutions. Once discovered, this practical wisdom became a permanent part of the human toolkit, passed from one generation to the next, often leaping across the ruins of fallen kingdoms to find new life elsewhere. Consider the brilliant water management of the Indus Valley. Their understanding of wells, drains, and public sanitation may have died with their cities, but the fundamental principles of controlling water for a settled life did not. This knowledge likely seeped into the cultural bedrock of the subcontinent, informing the village planning and agricultural practices of countless successor cultures for millennia. Far to the west, the vibrant Minoan Civilization on Crete met a sudden end, its palaces shattered by volcanic eruption and invasion. Yet their sophisticated art, their maritime technology, and their intricate religious symbols did not simply evaporate. They were absorbed, adapted, and reinvented by the Mycenaean Greeks who rose to power in their wake. The Mycenaeans did not copy the Minoans, but they built upon their foundation, creating a new and powerful culture from the scattered pieces of the old. This is the quiet, persistent heartbeat of human progress. A collapsed civilization is like a fallen forest. The great trees are gone, but the soil is now richer, fertilized by their decay, ready to nurture new and different forms of life. Their architectural techniques became inspirations for later builders. Their artistic styles echoed in the pottery of distant peoples. Their spiritual concepts, their gods and goddesses, transformed and merged with new beliefs, their original names forgotten but their essence living on. No grand experiment in building a society, no matter how complete its failure, truly dies without leaving a trace. Its greatest achievements become anonymous, dissolving into the common heritage of all humanity. We are still building our world today with blocks they unknowingly shaped in the deep, silent past. These ancient patterns of rise and fall are not locked in the past, they are unfolding all around us in real time. Our modern global civilization, for all its technological wonders, is replaying the same fundamental dynamics that brought down Caral and the Indus Valley. We have built a world of breathtaking complexity, a tightly woven network of just-in-time supply chains, specialized labor, and intense resource consumption that mirrors the hyper-efficient yet brittle systems of our predecessors. We are now facing our own version of a 4.2 kiloyear event, a planetary-scale crisis driven not by natural climate cycles, but by human activity. The relentless burning of fossil fuels, the clearing of ancient forests, and the overharvesting of our oceans are pushing Earth systems toward a tipping point, just as the slow salinization of soil or the deforestation of Malta pushed those societies to the brink. The stories of prehistoric collapse deliver a stark and urgent message. Ecological overshoot is a primary cause of civilizational failure. A society simply cannot outlast the destruction of its own environmental foundation. The silent ruins of the Maya, who watched their cities be reclaimed by the jungle after centuries of deforestation and drought, stand as a monument to this exact principle. So what can we learn from their silence? The first lesson is the danger of overspecialization. Our global food system relies on a handful of staple crops, our energy on concentrated sources, our economy on intricate, far-flung trade routes. This lack of diversity creates immense vulnerability, just as a single crop failure could cripple an ancient city-state. A disruption in one part of our global network can trigger cascading failures everywhere. The solution lies in building resilience, not just efficiency. This means creating redundant systems, local food networks that can function if global shipping falters, decentralized energy grids powered by diverse sources, and robust social safety nets that can catch people when shocks inevitably occur. Perhaps the most difficult lesson is about ideological rigidity. The priest-kings of old who could not adapt their rituals to a changing climate lost their legitimacy. Today, we face a similar test. Clinging to outdated economic models or political ideologies that prioritize short-term growth over long-term survival is a recipe for collapse. The people of Çatalhöyük did not stubbornly die in their crumbling city. They made a pragmatic choice to adapt and disperse. Their story shows that the will to change, to embrace a new way of living, is the ultimate key to resilience. The study of these lost worlds is not a prophecy of doom. It is a profound gift of data from the deep past. It is a warning, yes, but also a guide. It reminds us that no civilization, no matter how advanced or powerful, is granted permanence. The fate of our own world will be determined by our ability to listen to these echoes from the silent earth and to choose a different, more sustainable path forward. The same silence that fuels our curiosity also invites wild speculation. When faced with the profound mystery of Göbekli Tepe or the precision of the Maltese temples, it can be tempting to fill the void with fantastical answers, to imagine lost super races from Atlantis or the direct intervention of ancient astronauts. These stories are compelling, but they fundamentally misread the evidence we have painstakingly gathered. Mainstream science rejects these notions not out of closed-mindedness, but because they violate a fundamental principle of inquiry, Occam's razor. This is the simple idea that among competing explanations, the one with the fewest unsupported assumptions is usually correct. The gradual, human story of technological development, from chipping the first stone tool to quarrying a multi-ton pillar, is written plainly in the archaeological layers. There is no need to invent a global, advanced civilization for which there is not a single piece of physical proof. The evidence, from the unique styles of pottery to the independent domestication of crops on different continents, points overwhelmingly to multiple, isolated centers of human genius. These fringe theories do more than just get the facts wrong. They commit a deeper injustice. By handing the credit for these monuments to aliens or mythical supermen, they rob our own ancestors of their breathtaking accomplishments. The real story of Göbekli Tepe is not that it was built by visitors from the stars, but that it was built by people just like us, hunter-gatherers with an extraordinary vision and a powerful collective will. That truth that human beings in our deep past were capable of such staggering achievements through their own ingenuity and cooperation is a far more revolutionary and inspiring narrative than any fiction. It places the power and the potential squarely in human hands where it has always belonged. Every artifact we pull from the earth was once touched by living hands. The silent skull in a grave, the broken pot in a hearth, these are not merely data points, they are the physical remains of a human life. This reality forces upon archaeology a profound ethical weight. The quest to understand prehistory is not a neutral science, it is an act of interpretation that carries immense responsibility. So we must ask who truly owns the past. Is it the international academic community, the government of the nation where a site is located, or the living descendants of the people who created it? For generations, the answer was assumed to be the first. Tombs were excavated, sacred objects were shipped to distant museums, and human remains were studied without consent. This approach treated ancient cultures as extinct specimens, their stories available for the taking. But a powerful and necessary shift is now underway, moving toward a model of collaborative archaeology. Here, indigenous communities and local populations are not subjects of study, but essential partners in research. They bring oral histories, cultural knowledge, and a deep, generational connection to the land that can transform our understanding of a site. This partnership acknowledges that the past is not a dead thing, but a living, breathing part of someone's present identity. The ethical obligation extends beyond physical remains into the very stories we tell. How we interpret collapse is never just about history. Narratives of civilizational failure have been repeatedly twisted to serve modern political agendas. The idea of inevitable decline has been misused to justify racist ideologies, suggesting that certain peoples or cultures are destined to fall due to inherent weaknesses. It has been wielded as a prophecy to forecast the doom of rival nations in the present day. This is why archaeologists must be so careful to avoid simplistic, deterministic explanations. To say a society fell because of climate change alone is to ignore human agency, the countless small decisions, the innovations attempted, the conflicts avoided or embraced. The real story is always one of a multitude of choices, constraints, and sheer accidents. Telling this story responsibly means resisting the clean, satisfying arc of fate. It means embracing the messy, uncertain, and profoundly human reality of history, where resilience and fragility are constantly at odds, and where the echoes of ancient choices still shape the world we live in today. The silent bones are beginning to speak a new language. We stand at the threshold of a revolution in our understanding of prehistory, driven by technologies that read clues once considered invisible. Ancient DNA analysis is now revealing epic, untold chapters of human migration. We are discovering that the collapse of one civilization did not mean the end of its people. Instead, genetic evidence shows waves of movement, intermingling, and resettlement, painting a picture of a dynamic, resilient human tapestry constantly rewoven after each great unraveling. It is a story written not in stone, but in the very code of life itself. At the same time, a groundbreaking field called proteomics allows scientists to identify animal species from the most fragile of remains. A crumb of ancient cheese, a trace of glue on a broken pot, or a scrap of weathered leather can now tell us exactly which creature it came from, revealing details of domestication, trade, and daily life that were forever lost to us before. Even more intimate are the stories locked in human teeth. Through isotope analysis, the chemical signatures preserved in enamel act as a lifelong passport. They can pinpoint the region where a person was born and even trace the shifts in their diet from childhood to adulthood, revealing individual journeys of migration across vast landscapes. These are no longer anonymous skeletons, but people with personal histories of movement and adaptation. The next great frontier literally lies beneath the waves. Underwater archaeology is turning its sights to the vast continental shelves, the sunken plains that were the true heartlands of humanity during the last ice age. Advanced sonar and submersibles are now scanning these drowned landscapes, searching for the preserved settlements of places like Doggerland. The dream is to find a site frozen in time, perhaps in the oxygen-starved depths of the Black Sea or sealed in a protective peat bog. Such a discovery would be the ultimate time capsule, a prehistoric Pompeii offering an undisturbed snapshot of a society on the eve of its transformation or its disappearance. The future of unraveling this deepest past no longer rests solely with the archaeologist's trowel. It is being forged in powerful new collaborations, where geneticists, climatologists, and data scientists work side by side with field researchers. This interdisciplinary fusion is weaving together threads of climate data, genetic lineages, and material culture into a single, rich narrative. We are no longer just unearthing artifacts. We are reconstructing entire ecosystems of human experience, listening at last to the myriad whispers rising from the silent earth. A clear rhythm pulses through the silence of these fallen worlds. The rise of civilization was not a one-time miracle but a recurring phenomenon, a melody played again and again on different instruments across the globe. Its composition always required the same essential notes. First, a period of climatic grace, a stable and generous environment that offered a reliable foundation. Then the revolutionary power of agriculture, which tethered people to the land and generated the surplus needed for specialization. This new abundance in turn fostered social hierarchy, creating the managers, priests, and engineers who could coordinate complex endeavors. And finally, a powerful shared ideology, a common story that bound thousands together in a collective purpose, giving them a reason to move mountains of stone. When these four forces converged, the result was a surge of collective energy capable of building pyramids, planning cities, and weaving vast trade networks. Yet this very convergence also wove the threads of its own potential unraveling. Their collapse was rarely a simple story of a single enemy or a lone catastrophe. It was a symphony of failure where multiple vulnerabilities played in a devastating harmony. Environmental stress, like a prolonged drought or a shifting river, would press upon a society already strained by its own success. Social rigidity could prevent a timely adaptation to the crisis. Extreme inequality might mean the ruling class was too detached from the suffering of the farmers to make wise decisions. And the sheer, breathtaking complexity of their systems, with every part dependent on every other part, created a house of cards. A shock to one corner, a failed harvest for instance, could send tremors through the entire structure, toppling trade, bankrupting the state, and shattering the public's faith in their leaders. The final trigger was often a major climatic shift, a planetary event like the 4.2 kiloyear drought that delivered the decisive blow to societies already balanced on a knife's edge. This was systemic collapse, a cascade of failure where the intricate machine of civilization simply seized up and fell silent. Yet this pattern is not a story of hopelessness. Woven into the same tapestry is the enduring thread of human resilience. When the great cities became unsustainable, people made the pragmatic choice to walk away. They dispersed, carrying with them the most vital cargo, the knowledge of how to domesticate plants, how to work metal, how to tell the stories that gave life meaning. This hard-won wisdom did not die, it migrated, was adapted, and was reborn in new forms. The collapse of one world often fertilized the soil for the next, a cycle of creative destruction that has defined our entire history. The silent stones ask us one final, haunting question. Are we, in our own complex and interconnected global society, listening to the echoes of this ancient rhythm, or are we merely composing another verse in the same recurring song? These stories of silent empires are not mere footnotes, they are the foundational chapters of the human story. They teach us a profound humility, demonstrating with stark clarity that grandeur and breathtaking achievement are no guarantee of longevity. Every pyramid, every planned city, stands as a testament to our potential, yet their silent ruins whisper the same urgent truth. Our fate is inextricably linked to the natural world. We see, time and again, the catastrophic consequences of ignoring its limits, of pushing an environment past its breaking point for the sake of short-term growth. But these narratives are not simply tales of failure. They are also powerful testimonies to human ingenuity, to our innate capacity for cooperation, and to that relentless, driving need to create meaning and impose order on a chaotic universe. The silent, imposing stones of Göbekli Tepe, the sunken, ghostly plains of Doggerland, the orderly, thoughtful streets of the Indus Valley, these are all monuments to both our potential and our enduring fragility. As we navigate our own global challenges, from climate shifts to resource pressures, these ancient echoes offer us invaluable wisdom. They do not provide a simple map, but they offer a compass, urging us to prioritize resilience over rigid efficiency, adaptability over brittle specialization, and long-term sustainability over fleeting abundance. The deepest past holds a mirror to our possible futures. Thank you for joining this journey into the silent epic of prehistory. If these mysteries of lost worlds captivate you as they do me, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please subscribe for more explorations into the hidden corners of history.